So we are starting back the session with the contributed talks, and the first one, and is already there, is Maxime Paillassa. He's going to discuss the source detection through semantic segmentation with the convolutional neural network. Maxime, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. So you have the floor, you have 12 minutes, and I'll warn you at 3 minutes before the end and 1 minute before the end. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So hello everyone, so I am Maxime Paillassa, postdoctoral researcher at Nagoya University in Japan. And in this presentation, I will talk about source detection through semantic segmentation with convolutional neural network, which actually is not part of my postdoctoral project, but is a continuation of my PhD project that I did with Emmanuel Bertin and Hervé Bouy in the Laboratoire d'Astrophysique de Bordeaux. So as I just mentioned, in our work, we're interested in source detection, which is the task of identifying all the objects like sources, galaxies and stars in images. And so source catalogs are essential, and as we've just seen, at the basis of many astrophysical studies, so it is essential to have reliable catalogs. And now we all know that with the large amounts of data that we are gathering, we need automatic source detection softwares. So we already have some like SExtractor, which I show some detections here in the Canada France-Hawaii Telescope Lensing Survey. But we see that we suffer from some limitations and that we cannot detect some sources near this bright star, or we fail at deblending sources in some places. So we want to improve source detection techniques. So how source detection is done in practice? So currently, most source detection pipelines proceed in several steps. Here I show how a SExtractor is proceeding. So it starts with a sky background subtraction. And then the core of the detection is a match filter, which is the optimal linear filter to maximize the signal-to-noise ratio of a given isolated pattern in an image. So in practice, it will consist of convolving the image by the PSF of the instrument. So this match filtering is shown in the top right image here. And then the detection of sources on this filtered image is done either by peak search or thresholding, like in source extractor. And finally, we can then run deblending procedures to possibly disentangle sources, multiple sources that would have been detected as a single component. So the match filter, which is the core of the source detection, has several limitations. One of them is that we can work only with one pattern at a time, while sources come in various scales and shapes. So it will cause problems, for example, detecting this very large source, or detecting the low surface brightness galaxy, which would need a different filter, a specific filter to be accurately detected. And another issue with the match filter is that it is optimal only when the pattern you are looking for is isolated in the image. So we will have issues when sources overlap, that is when sources are blending. Finally, another limitation of current source detection pipelines is that they are sensitive of contamination in images, like we can see here, where we make false detections on diffraction spikes of this star, or on satellite trails on this other image. So our strategy is to extend current methods with machine learning, especially convolutional neural networks, in order to be able to perform more adaptive filtering, so to have a system that would be able to handle all the limitations I've just mentioned, that is to handle the different scales, shapes of sources, as the blended sources and the contaminants in images. And we are changing viewpoints compared to the more algorithmical approach that we had before. And so now we have a data-driven approach in a supervised machine learning framework, where we will work with an input-output dataset and learn a model by iterating learning steps, which consists of making a prediction, assessing this prediction with a loss function, and optimizing the model in regard of the errors that we made on our predictions. So we will iterate a lot of learning steps like this, so we will need a lot of training data, but we have huge amount of data available in astronomy. So now I'll go into more detail about the solution we have for source detection. So in the deep learning terminology, we say that the system must be instance aware. That is, it must be able to detect every object individually. And this makes it difficult to design architectures and loss functions and to solve detection and deblending at the same time, especially if you want to do this in one single network path. But this is what we can do with the deep coloring approach, which rely on a semantic segmentation convolutional neural network. That is a network that can make pixel labeling. So we can flag sources in different output maps. And the principle of the deep coloring approach is that our CNN can freely identify each source in any of the four output maps that we can call color maps. And we have a constraint during training so that close objects are identified in different output maps, different colors. So that each object will be isolated in its output map, and we will recover all the objects in all the output maps easily in post-processing. So the difficulty of this approach is that to compute the appropriate loss, we need to know where each object has been identified by the network during training. So we have to assign a color to each object. And this is what we do with the deep coloring approach, where we have for each source, we define a footprint that is shown in green here, which defines the pixels that we want to flag to identify the source. And we define a halo, which is depicted by the red area around the object, and which show a neighborhood of the object. And we will assign a color to each object at training according to this following criterion, which basically means that with this first term, that we will want all the footprint pixels flagged in a given color, and that at the same time we will want all the halo pixels not flagged in this color, which forces the network to flag other objects, close objects that would lie in the halo in another column. So this is how we can separate objects in different output maps. So to train this network, we need training data, and we decide to rely on noise-free images of isolated sources so that we can compute any footprint that we like, and we can build whole images from scratch. So for stars, we are using SkyMaker, and here I show some star profiles that we are using, including different diffraction spike configurations. And for galaxies, we rely on cosmological simulations, and we try to use the maximum of data that we can to have the most reliable and generic detector in practice. So we use galaxies from the Horizon AGN project, from the Illustris TNG project here in the middle, and from the Vela cosmological project as well. So using all this data, we generate training images like the one I show here, where I show in overlay the ground truth footprint. And on the right, I show an image that contain contaminants like a satellite trail here or bad pixels that I add in images to make the CNN robust to the presence of contaminant. And to do this, I rely on a work of mine on Maximask, which is a convolutional neural network that can identify contaminants in images, and for which I already had to make training data. So after training on thousands of images like this, we can assess qualitative performance on test images. So here I present in the middle a test image with ground truth footprints, and on the left, the SExtractor detections, and on the right, the CNN predictions. And we see that we have the expected behavior, that the network is using different colors to detect close objects like here, and it can deblend those objects while SExtractor is not doing it. And we can also notice that the CNN is able to detect faint sources that SExtractor is missing. on the bottom example, I show an image that is contaminated, and we see that the network is not triggering false detections on the trail. It can even detect sources within the trail, while SExtractor is making some false detections on the whole trail. So we also assess the performance with quantitative measures. So we compute the completeness and contamination for the CNN and SExtractor for various thresholds. So we use thresholds in the probability space of the output maps for the CNN and at different sky sigmas for SExtractor. And we plot for each of these thresholds the completeness versus the contamination. So the left plot is done with uncontaminated images, while we have contaminated images on the right plot. We see that we can achieve slightly better performance than SExtractor. And one thing that we can especially notice is that the performance of the CNN is not really affected by the presence of contaminants, and it exhibits more or less the same performance. So taking back the images I've shown in the beginning, we see that the network is able to overcome the limitation we had before, that we can detect sources near the bright stars, especially near the diffraction spike, without making false detection on the diffraction spikes. That we can also detect galaxies with various morphologies, and that we can also see on this second example, like we can deblend and detect accurately all the sources here, or deblend as well sources with different morphologies. So in practice, using a naive Python implementation that is without multi-threading, we can go at more than 1 megapixel per second, and which means that we can process a 4K by 4K CCD in less than 12 seconds. And we have integrated this source detector in Source Extractor++, next generation SExtractor. So this is already done thanks to the modularity of the software and the ONNX library, which enables to convert TensorFlow or Keras models into a usable format in the C++ Source Extractor. And so segmentation maps are naturally handled in SExtractor that already uses them. And we have possibility to optimize for various hardwares, and we hope that it will facilitate use and benchmark for comparisons. So to quickly conclude, we have a generic and efficient source detection method with CNNs, and with the deep coloring approach, we can separate detection in different output maps. And with our comprehensive and diverse data, we are able to detect various source morphologies and to be robust to the presence of contaminants. So we are going now for internal testing, and I hope it will be available soon. So thanks.
Thanks a lot, Maxime. And thanks for keeping the time, which is tough. Those are very small talks. So I have a question. I have two questions in the room. Perhaps one there first, and then I will have questions from Slack as well.
Hi, Maxime.
Please state your name. Yep.
It's Hubert Bretonnière. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering, how do you exactly define your true mask? Like, for example, the size of your mask. At what? Yeah. What surface brightness do you extend, or things like that?
Yeah, so we start from a noise-free image of isolated sources, as stated in the data, and and on those images we compute footprints at 1/4 of the flux of the sources. But this may be this is a sort of hyperparameter. This can be customized if we want, but this is a choice that we have done for this run.
Okay, I'll go with the Slack talk, Slack question first. So José Manuel Casas Gonzalez asked, could this method be extended to a study? Could be extended study to a multi-frequency approach to characterize through colors each type of astrophysical objects acting as a point source training and training it with spectral information. So essentially, can you go to multi-frequency?
Yeah. So well, if we can simulate and have multi-band data, for instance, it's easy to just add different channels as inputs in the network.
Okay.
So yeah.
I have a question from Henry.
Maxime, thank you for the very nice talk. You can imagine the number of people that are waiting to test out the software. Can you just comment on the how you define the detection reliability of each of the sources? Because of course, in SExtractor, you can say it's a 2 sigma or 3 sigma source, and that's obviously quite useful for characterizing the reliability of each detection. Have you thought about adding something like that?
Yeah, this is something that we could do, like assessing in more details the selection function of the detector. And so yeah, this is something that we plan to do with tailored simulations. We can probably compute such metrics.
Okay, thanks.
There are lots of other questions on Slack, so you can answer them offline after. But I want to do a simple one from Mijin Yoon. How fast is the running speed compared to SExtractor?
I don't exactly know, so we'll need to make benchmarks. So, well, I don't know. I have those performance with Python, and also it will be interesting to know within source extractor plus what is the computing time difference. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Maxime, again.
Thank you.
So you have lots of questions to answer as well on Slack.